You will now be entering Module 4, Chapter 14, Budgeting. Please review this section and complete the assignment with a minimum score of 80%.
Every budget has a cycle or time frame for its use. Most governments will operate on a fiscal year. For example, the federal government's budget goes from October 1st to September 30th of each year, while most state and local government budgets go from July 1st to June 30th. Private corporations, such as a nonprofit EMS agency, may use the calendar year or the fiscal year for their budget life cycle. All budgets include projected revenue or income and expenditures or expenses. In this chapter, we will explore different types of income and expenses and the impact when revenue is lower or expenses are higher than expected. This chapter also includes an overview of the typical purchasing process. Budgeting and purchasing are two aspects of an agency's financial process. Financial process should be in place to help ensure the agency can meet its financial obligations, to help ensure the agency has adequate financial resources to be able to provide high quality services, and also to protect agency personnel as well as those who provide those funds. Every type of agency or business should have a budget to guide their operations. Budgets are estimates and are used as a guide for decisions throughout the budget process and cycle. The amount they have to spend depends heavily on the revenue they receive for services rendered, contributions, or grant awards. It is not unusual for expenditures to be decreased or increased during the year based on the revenue stream. For simplicity, we define revenue as income from all sources and expenditures as money spent for goods or services. The budget process is an ongoing cycle. This process typically starts with the results of the prior budget through review of financial reports, which include actual income and expenses. The new cycle includes identification of needs and resources, preparation of the budget, budget review and approval, administration of the budget, monitoring of income and expense through financial reports with ongoing adjustments as required, and closeout at the end of the budget year. This budget process is a cycle which includes the following: identification of needs and resources, preparation of a budget request, local government and public review, adoption of an approved budget, administration of the approved budget with periodic review and revision, and closeout of the budget year. Typically, agencies will follow jurisdictional guidelines as to the development and administration of a budget. Various realities impact development and administration of a budget, including political decisions and competition among other departments within a jurisdiction, competing priorities within the EMS agency, national healthcare policy, insurance company decisions, changing local demographics and contributions, an unexpected rise in the cost of equipment or supplies, and any number of other factors. In many organizations, the budget is managed by senior management, with the rank and file of the organization knowing very little about the budget, its purpose, and how it's administrated. Everyone, however, should be aware that a budget exists. Through the appropriate chain of command, the EMS officer should identify and justify budget or spending at the unit or station level. All personnel should realize that the budget will probably have restrictions on what can and can't be spent, and will certainly have spending limits. Once the budget is approved, the EMS officer and team should review and understand their applicable part and work to stay within spending guidelines and communicate to superiors if and why spending may exceed the available budget. Budgets may be developed in two phases, which allow for better budget preparation by larger organizations, which give them more time to review, provide for adjustment and approval. We know revenues are difficult to predict, one much less 2 years out. We also know that elected officials and agency directors want to keep budgets level if at all possible. For that reason, they will ask for a base budget at current funding levels, then a supplemental budget that goes beyond the current level in case revenue predictions or actual revenue increases. The goal is to keep service level at least at current levels. Typically, elected officials and agency directors will find ways to maintain the current service. During good economic times, service levels may actually increase. In local, state, and federal government budgets, it takes a lot of time to work the budget process due to the various levels of bureaucracy. In private organizations, such as corporations or smaller EMS agencies, the process does not take as long, but still requires a lot of work to be effective. When agency revenue comes from the local government, the elected officials and other local government leadership need to understand the EMS agency needs and see results. An effective community education program, described in another chapter, should include elected and other top officials. Education of these officials becomes even more important when requesting supplemental budget items. From the EMSO1 level, when requesting a unit or station level budget item, that education should include at least your superior, and if allowable by agency policy or guidelines, others up the chain of command. Income for an EMS agency comes from a variety of sources, such as local government support, fundraising activities like bingo, fish fries, chicken dinners, donations, etc., grant awards, investment income, and renting of station facilities for community events. More and more EMS agencies, including volunteer agencies, now seek income from patient and insurance company billing, also referred to as revenue recovery. While revenue recovery can be an excellent source of revenue, an EMS agency needs to ensure the methods of billing and collections comply with the law and governmental regulations. Sometimes EMS agency leadership, including small unit leaders like an EMS Officer 1, are given authorization to spend to certain dollar limits or within the confines of an adopted budget. Other times, at least two persons will be required to authorize spending, or perhaps spending that exceeds certain dollar limits. Sometimes multiple quotes or cost proposals are required from three or more vendors, depending on the total dollar amount of the anticipated purchase. Spending policies for everyday purchases will vary from policies for spending of capital assets like expensive equipment, facilities, and vehicles. Bottom line, spending policies will vary by agency and locality, and usually by the value of the spending. The EMS officer needs to know the local policies. Revenue obtained from specific sources such as grant awards and Virginia's Return to Locality for Life EMS funds must be spent for specific purposes. These sources of funds are often referred to as restricted funds. It is important that anyone in an agency working with those funds understand the limitations and restrictions placed on the use of these funds. Some of these sources require certain record keeping. Some will require specific lengths of time records must be kept, and some will require follow-up reporting that must be provided in order to obtain the funds. Within a budget, it is also often possible to move unrestricted funding from one category to another when one category has remaining funds and the other has been overspent. Such moves generally occur toward the ends of the budget year. Your role is to help identify those needs and required funding so that budget administrators can, if available and approved, reallocate those funds. Revenue obtained from specific sources such as grant awards and Virginia's Return to Locality for Life EMS funds must be spent for specific purposes. These sources of funds are often referred to as restricted funds. It is important that anyone in an agency working with those funds understand the limitations and restrictions placed on the use of these funds. Some of these sources require certain record keeping. Some will require specific lengths of time records must be kept, and some will require follow-up reporting that must be provided in order to obtain the funds. Within a budget, it is also often possible to move unrestricted funding from one category to another when one category has remaining funds and the other has been overspent. Such moves generally occur toward the ends of the budget year. Your role is to help identify those needs and required funding so that budget administrators can, if available and approved, reallocate those funds. When revenue drops, the ability of an EMS agency to provide its services in an effective manner will be greatly impacted, resulting in an agency either reorganizing to meet the challenges or being forced to close their doors. Options include defer scheduled expenditures, prioritize or contract out some services, regionalize or consolidate services, reduce the workforce, reduce the size of the agency. An EMS Officer 1 may sometimes be asked to help explain why an agency is having to take these actions. Most agencies will have an officer assigned to the task of maintaining supplies or being the maintenance officer responsible for the equipment, such as ambulances, radios, medical equipment, etc. These officers must follow certain procedures to ensure compliance with agency or locality purchasing guidelines. Unfortunately, many agency officers have found themselves in legal hot water when they have misused agency funds for personal gain. Don't take this responsibility lightly. You can be legally responsible or incur reputation damage at least. Many agencies will use a petty cash account to allow purchase of small items not requiring the treasurer to issue a check. An example might be the purchase of some screws or tape to make a minor repair in a station or on a vehicle. Regardless of its use, petty cash must be regulated and funds accounted for by having a receipt for the items purchased and the purpose of that expense. This helps the treasurer to maintain accountability for all agency funds. This becomes extremely important during annual audits. Many agencies, especially larger ones and all governments, will use a purchase order system to make purchases. The process of issuing a purchase order usually begins with the requisition of an item by someone in the agency. In some agencies, everyone is authorized to initiate a requisition. In others, it may be the EMS officer or some other authorized individuals. The requisition may pass through one or more approval levels and is then sent to a purchasing agent who ensures there are adequate budget funds to support the purchase, may put the purchase out to bid if required, and selects a vendor. A purchase order is then sent to the vendor, who is then authorized to fill the purchase and invoice the agency. A combination of efforts, including the original requester, the approvers, and the purchasing agent, help ensure that the EMS agency obtains the goods and services with both high quality and low cost as the goal. If the requester has a single vendor in mind, perhaps because of the specialty nature of the purchase, a sole source justification is usually part of the requisition. That justification needs to describe why that single vendor is the best choice while other vendors are not. This bidding process is usually used for items ranging from cardiac monitors, radios, backboards, etc., up to and including ambulances. An agency may also write the bid process so that other agencies can also purchase off the vendor's price for that item. More complex purchases may involve a request for proposal process. A good example of a request for proposal, or RFP, is when an agency is looking for a billing company to prepare and submit invoices for EMS revenue recovery, or fee-for-service, or for the purchase of a new ambulance. When using a bid process, it is done openly for everyone involved. This way, vendors that are bidding in the process know the outcome of the submitted bids. Once the bids are open, the EMS agency will review each bid individually to select the vendor which will provide the item or service to the agency for the best price possible. Many times, the vendor with the lowest bid will not be successful because they are unable to meet all aspects of the bid request. The agency will routinely look for the best value in what they purchase, primarily because their available funding is limited. Every EMS agency will or should have an operating budget by which they operate on a daily basis. As an EMS Officer 1, you will manage only a small portion of the agency's budget, but take that responsibility seriously. You and your agency's financial survival depends on it. If an agency does not have a steady revenue stream, then quite often they will be unable to meet the expenses of their operation and will therefore be unable to continue their service to the community. There are a variety of ways in which an EMS agency can meet their budget requirements. How they do this is really an individual agency prerogative. Those who are custodians of petty cash, or anyone who receives or handles cash for an EMS agency, is trusted to comply with agency financial policies. Agencies should ensure that adequate financial controls are in place to account for all funds at all times. When it comes to an EMS agency's fund, the old adage of trust but verify truly applies. Budgets are a tool for an EMS agency to manage its revenue and expenditures effectively on a daily basis. Even if the EMS officer is not directly involved in the management of the budget, you are vital to its success. Understanding what funds are available to use and for what purpose helps keep everyone focused on the business of the EMS agency providing effective and efficient emergency medical services to their community on a daily basis. You should also help identify spending needs and communicate those needs in accordance with agency policy.